Have you ever played a game where the amazing story is only revealed within the depths and intricacies of that game? Where, on the surface, the game is only a fun survival game, a puzzle game, or a Metroidvania? One with a world that somehow you know so much about, without being able to pin down exactly where you were shown it. There are many ways something like this can be accomplished, which is why I want to explore it more with you in this video. My favorite game to play is Don't Starve Together by Klei Entertainment. On the first glance, this game seems to just be a simple survival game without any storyline or background to the world. But it would be a mistake to think this. This game has a system of lore that, though hidden on the surface, influences the mechanics of the game to a point where characters all have positive and negative attributes based on their stories and personal experiences. Don't Starve Together manages to convey its lore through a very interesting method, particularly for an indie studio. Game updates. Klei Entertainment has created a real-time progression of the overarching story by making each new content update also advance the main storyline. With each update, the lore seems to be closer and closer to the ultimate conclusion. This tale began over 9 years ago with the original release trailer of Don't Starve back in February of 2013. The trailer follows how the default character, Wilson, was lured into the Constant by the malevolent forces of Maxwell. But within the game, only accessible through Maxwell's portal, the player can continue this story. The player can take Wilson through many dangers that eventually culminate in Wilson taking Maxwell's place on the Shadow Throne. Upon the release of Don't Starve Together, this lore was built upon once again as Charlie, Maxwell's former assistant, seizes the Shadow Throne from Wilson. Now, the survivors have an antagonist with unknown motives. This story continues in the form of character trailers and update trailers to the current day. In fact, Klei Entertainment will have released the trailer for Wickerbottom mere hours before this video releases. This type of storytelling gives everything in the game a solid reason for existing, even in a randomly generated survival game such as Don't Starve Together. Even though the world is procedural, nothing seems entirely random. This hidden storytelling makes the unlikely connection to Hollow Knight by Team Cherry. This game is a journey through a world that is exceedingly fleshed out, but does not force this backstory on the player. Nearly all the dialogue is optional, and only a few select story events occur over the course of the game. Someone could play the game and never experience more than just pretty art and excellent boss fights. But this method of hiding the lore and story in a game will lead to fewer people experiencing it overall. So that begs the question, why would a game developer want to do that? Team Cherry has done something very interesting. They have broken up the story and lore into tiny bits and have sprinkled it throughout the entire world, rather than just presenting it to the player on a silver platter. This allows players and YouTubers to piece together the game's story to form one complete image in their minds, which for me is extremely fun. I think that this allows a story to last longer for the individual without being too stretched out. In fact, the YouTuber Mossbag was only able to sum up the full story of the game in an hour-long video. This type of storytelling could benefit indie games in particular, since the small team size does not allow for the amount of pure content that AAA studios can produce. Stretching out the story makes it a joy to find and experience. The player can feel like the detective or historian rather than the listener. But there are those that might be turned off by this mode of storytelling. Some people just don't search out the story, and thus never realize that it was there in the first place. One solution to this is to take a sort of middle ground, like how Valve has done with Portal 2, released in 2011. In this game, GLaDOS, the robot antagonist, sarcastically narrates the story and what is happening in the moment. The main mechanic is solving the puzzles using the Aperture portal gun, and the main story is just there to help the player pass the time. The game focuses more on the story as the game progresses, since Portal 2 is even split into in-game chapters. The sections between standard levels become larger and larger as the player has more opportunities to learn about what is really going on in this world. So, unlike Hollow Knight, where the path is chosen by the player, this story is very linear. The only deviations possible are small side paths that lead off from the main story path. Portal 2 pushes the story right in the players' faces, and thus it's impossible to miss while playing the game. But, in order to satisfy players that yearn for more background to the story, like myself, the developers have included tidbits of lore in optional side areas, whether that be through writing on the wall, the broken science exhibits of the lab members' children, or actual audio recordings from Cave Johnson himself. This will probably satisfy the players who yearn to feel like the historian in their search for more lore. Unfortunately, a compromise like this will make the lore seem smaller than something like Hollow Knight, due to it not being the actual focus of the story. There is one more game that I felt I just couldn't leave out of a video about storytelling, and that is the Stanley Parable, released in 2013. The point of the game is to follow, or not follow, the narrator's constant instructions. When an ending is reached, the game begins again, and the player can take a different path, with different narration. While this game seems to just be a fun trip of disobeying your superiors, I believe that this game has even more of a story buried just under the surface. The game resets after each ending, but the different storylines all take place within the same map, and the same world. So, each storyline lets the player learn a little more about what this world is like. In the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, two storylines perfectly align, as they both speak of the bucket turning into a dark creature that Stanley must sacrifice. The skip button ending and the epilogue also line up, leading the world to contain a sense of consistency between storylines. Considering this, the Stanley Parable storytelling is like Hollow Knight storytelling. In Hollow Knight, the story cannot be viewed all at once, and is instead broken into different parts sprinkled around the map. In the Stanley Parable, the story is split throughout the timelines, but to the player, the information might be absorbed over the same amount of time. I believe we have now reached why these stories seem so great while being hidden at the same time. All the developers have put an incredible amount of thought into their worlds, and instead of adding story elements for no reason, they've instead carefully planned out their stories to make sure they are consistent throughout the game. The loose ends in these worlds have been cleaned up, allowing players to search for the lore without worrying that it will contradict itself. I don't want to sound like this is the only way to tell a story, because it's not. There are multitudes of ways to communicate your world. Hiding your story like these games is just one of those ways to do that, but I think it is one that is often overlooked due to its nature. But it is a type of story that I love, and I just might use in a game of my own. With that said, thank you for watching. If you still yearn for more of my droning, try clicking one of the videos you see on screen now.